Usually, the very, very bright, new screenwriting students, sometimes straight out of undergrad, will come in and say things like, what's the midpoint of this script? And where in the third act would you do this? And I just stare at them and say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Which kicks off a whole other discussion about structure and what structure is and isn't, and why I want them to throw out all those books that they've read about screenwriting and focus on finding a voice. Who knew?
You made this film before Roe v. Wade was overturned. It's interesting, Liana, I was talking to her about it, and she said, oh, now your movie called Jane is like a user's manual, which we're going to need right now.
Who knew? I mean, you know, I didn't think we were making a primer on how to do this, but it can be used because the procedures in the film are real. They are absolutely medically correct. The only difference today, I will say, is that they use suction instead of curettes for that kind of medical abortion. Roe has been chipped away and chipped away and chipped away for 40 some odd years. It wasn't a surprise to me that this was going to happen, but the speed with which it happened, maybe that was a surprise. But while we were making it, the makeup of the court of SCOTUS was there, you know?
Right.
We had those two guys, and we had Handmaid's Tale lady. So this is not, this was always going to happen. What appealed to me about this, above all else, were two things. One, we now culturally in the United States, the idea of collective action is something we don't do very well. We do performative activism, hitting buttons on Twitter and going out to the streets and holding signs, which passes for collective action. But what these women were doing was really activism. It's the idea of cells, the idea of groups of covert people working together to solve a problem, right? In this case, they had to do it covertly because abortion was not legal there. But the fact is, they get more done together than they do alone. Also, unfortunately, there's a huge literature of abortion cinema now, because it's always a problem, right? And most of it focuses on the misery, on the pain, on the exceptionalism. But most women who have abortions don't have that experience. I understand about drama, right? But this was trying to present something that was not a problem. It normalizes a medical procedure. And I think in that way, it's quite radical. You know, this is not, I mean, people have talked to me about this movie and say, well, you know, I'm surprised to see you doing something so, sometimes they don't know how to the language that they're using. It's conventional, it's Hollywood. I was like, is it conventional to, have you ever seen an abortion scene in a movie like this? Have you ever seen this kind of action? I agree, it's using a form that is quite stealthily easy to watch.
Yes.
Yes. But so that maybe it works against itself because it's easy to watch. The people say, wow, that's nothing.
But that gets people to watch it.
It gets people to watch it. Humor, a lack of judgment, and an ability to just want to go right there without calling attention to it. And to do, I don't want to say a positive experience because that's not what I mean, but focusing on something that works rather than something that doesn't work, which is what normally movies about abortion and about women's rights are. What was clear is that the Jane Collective they didn't have a leader. So the character of Virginia is a dramatic convenience, right?
So this Heather Booth is that a urban myth?
She was very young, and they were all very young. They were college students, or some of them were, but they didn't really, back in the day, no one was a leader. Mm-hmm. But, you do need a leader in a movie of some sort.
Yeah.
Sigourney is, obviously not 22 years old. We don't have a collective made up of the right kind of demographic that the Janes really were, except in one way. They were mostly young white women. There was one core black Jane member. And once they started learning how to do the procedures themselves, they were able to open it up to women of color as clients more often, who then came and joined, just like Joy. But before that, you needed the money.
Right.
You needed the $600 or whatever they were charging.
Right.
So yeah, economically, it did not make for a very diverse group. Learn how to talk about your work. Learn how to tell a story about your work. Not, hey, I want to, I'm going to do this cool and groovy thing with the camera and blah, blah, blah. They don't know, okay? They don't know they do know what you're talking about, but they don't. You have to spin a tale. This is why this story is meaningful. Let me tell you a story about how I came to write this. Learn how to be articulate about things like that. Pretend you're in a bar and you're just swapping a story with someone who happens to be a studio executive. It really works. I learned more about selling. This sounds glib, but I don't mean it to be. I learned more about talking to people about things like this from watching episodes of The Golden Girls.
Wait, explain that.
Well, where Sophia, the grandma's, picture this, Sicily, 1920.
Oh. Wait, that's brilliant.
It's brilliant.
Why don't we use that here?
I do.
Well, you do, yes.
And what I learned, or have learned over the years, is that a lot of people really don't know how to talk about their work. You really are way ahead of the game if you can.